On the day of her college entrance exams, my childhood sweetheart missed her first love's desperate phone call. That same day, her first love died in a tragic accident. She hated me for stopping her from taking that call and made my life a living hell for it. She despised me, yet she used her family's power to force me into a marriage, all for the sake of revenge. She said that a person like me was destined to live a life of misery. Reborn into a new life, I watched as she answered that call, only to end up with a broken leg, a disfigured face, and a ruined future. But this time, she was the one filled with regret. 1. I was reborn on the day of Victoria Wainwright's dance audition. I glanced around. The other contestants were all making their final preparations before going on stage. Eleanor Wainwright was adjusting Victoria's dance costume, her movements as gentle as if she were handling a priceless treasure. And I was like an outsider, holding her dance shoes, standing silently to the side. The performance on stage was for Victoria's audition for a prestigious dance academy. "Mom, don't be nervous. Just cheer for me from the audience," Victoria said with a smile, though a hint of anxiety lurked in her eyes. "Vicky, this is the dance academy you've always dreamed of. You have to do your best. If you don't get in, your father will go on about you not taking your life seriously again," Eleanor said, worried. "Don't worry. I've prepared for so long. There won't be any problems. I'll definitely get in this time," Victoria comforted her softly. It was only when a staff member urged the contestants to get ready that I was jolted back to reality. So, I was back. Back to the day of Victoria's dance audition. This was also the day her white moonlight first love, Lucas Marshall, died. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst from my chest. In my past life, when Lucas's call for help came, Victoria was just about to go on stage. It was the critical moment that would decide if she could enter her dream dance academy. My family, the Clarks and the Wainwrights, were old family friends. I grew up with Victoria. I knew her too well. I knew what this audition meant to her. I was worried she would miss the performance to answer the phone, destroying her dream. So when I saw Lucas's name on the screen, I secretly switched her phone to silent. Later, Victoria passed the audition with flying colors, but she broke down when she saw the missed calls from Lucas. When she tried to call back, the line was dead. The next day, the terrible news arrived. Victoria lost control and rushed at me, grabbing my shirt. Her eyes were bloodshot as she screamed at me, demanding to know why I had silenced her phone, accusing me of being an indirect murderer of Lucas Marshall. If I hadn't touched her phone, she could have reached him in time. The heavy burden of guilt kept me up at night. I'd never faced such a grave consequence. The loss of a life left me in a constant state of panic. I was crushed by her accusations, truly believing it was all my fault, and let her vent her fury on me. From that day on, I became the target of bullying for the entire school. Everyone looked at me as if I were a murderer. I lived in a daze, and my grades plummeted. During this time, Victoria used her connections to make me miss my college entrance exams. Later, she used her family's influence to force me to marry her, then found endless ways to torture me. "Sincere Clark," she'd say, "a person like you deserves to be alone and miserable. You should spend this entire life in agony. You need to remember the mistake you made, every single moment, and live in guilt forever." And so, I spent the rest of my life in endless self-reproach. 2. She locked me in the most remote attic of the Wainwright estate, forcing me to live a life more wretched than a stray dog's. Finally, on a rainy day, I chose to end my life by jumping from the roof. And Lucas Marshall, he too had died in an accident on a rainy day. A ringing sound shattered my memories. The backstage area was dimly lit. I stood frozen in the waiting area, staring at the vibrating phone screen. It was Lucas, calling amidst the backstage chaos. The ringtone was jarringly loud. I stared at the screen, my palms slick with cold sweat. In my last life, this call was the beginning of my presumptuous decision that ultimately ruined everyone. This time, I would not repeat the same mistake. Victoria was doing her final prep with her mother and didn't seem to notice the phone. The backstage was a cacophony of practice sounds and staff instructions. You'd have to be listening carefully to pick out a single ringtone. Tears blurred my vision without me realizing. So even if I hadn't deliberately silenced it, Victoria might not have heard Lucas's call. None of this should have ever been my burden to bear. I turned the phone's volume to maximum. The ringing finally reached Victoria's ears. She frowned and glanced at me. "Whose phone is that?" "Just ignore it." She knew with the competition about to start, all distractions should be avoided. I gave a cold snort and held the phone out in front of her. No one was stopping her this time. Let's see what she would choose. When she saw Lucas's name on the caller ID, Victoria froze. She bit her lip, hesitating for a long time until the ringing stopped on its own. "Who was that?" Eleanor asked casually. Victoria just said it was nothing, but then the phone rang again. This time Eleanor caught a glimpse of the screen and her face instantly darkened. "Are you still seeing that, punk? Are you trying to kill me with anger?" Eleanor was so furious she stomped her foot. "Mom, Big M must be in some kind of emergency," Victoria said, then turned to me. I noticed she was still making no move to answer the call. She looked at me with pleading eyes, as if waiting for me to provide an excuse for her. The scene was so ironic it made me sick. She didn't dare defy her parents' wishes, but if I stepped in to stop her, she could absolve herself of her own cowardice. "Sincere, do something, this girl is getting out of hand." Eleanor shot me a blaming look. A cold smile touched my lips. They were all waiting for me to be the scapegoat so they could feel justified in directing their anger at me. How could I have been so stupid before? I remembered in my past life when Victoria was relentlessly tormenting me, Eleanor only said, 3. "Sincere, just bear with it a little longer. It'll be fine once Vicky calms down." Victoria stared at me, clearly expecting me to give her an excuse to refuse the call. Instead, I said, "Mrs. Wainwright, Lucas has been calling repeatedly. Maybe he's really in some kind of trouble. There are still 10 minutes before the performance, and we're all waiting here anyway." I offered no specific advice, leaving the decision entirely up to her. Hearing this, Victoria's eyes flickered. She then stepped aside to answer the phone. She wasn't gone long before she ran back, her face deathly pale. "Mom, I have an emergency. I have to leave right now. You're about to go on stage and you're throwing it all away for that good-for-nothing." Victoria glanced at me. "Sincere is here to keep you company." With that, she bolted out of the backstage area. Of course, I was just the tool she used to clean up her messes. Eleanor was seething, stomping her foot with nowhere to vent her anger, so she turned it on me. "Why didn't you stop her? You just watched her run off with that hooligan," she glared at me, her disappointment palpable. I just felt disgusted. She couldn't even control her own daughter, yet she had the nerve to blame me. Why should I be responsible for disciplining her child? Because our families were friends? Because I had once shown affection for Victoria? Just then, my own phone rang. I frowned, feigning a look of panic. "Dad, what happened?" "I'm on my way." Hanging up, I turned to Eleanor with urgency. "Mrs. Wainwright, my dad was just in a car accident and is in the hospital. I have to go see him right away." Eleanor wanted to keep me there but couldn't find a suitable reason. While she was still stunned, I quickly left the scene. In reality, I had sent my dad a text beforehand, asking him to play along with this little act. This family of hypocrites, I never wanted to have anything to do with them again. To maintain the business relationship between our families, my dad still went to the hospital under some pretext. I fought to contain my excitement. Next, on her way to meet Lucas, Victoria would get into a car accident. One of her legs would be permanently disabled. In my previous life, I managed to call an ambulance in time, preventing a more severe outcome. But this time, things would be completely different. Victoria and I grew up together, and our parents had arranged our engagement from a young age. 4. Victoria grew up exactly as Eleanor wanted. She was elegant and graceful, an excellent student who consistently topped her class, known as the ice beauty of the campus. But over a decade of living by the rules had left Victoria feeling suffocated. In her final year of high school, she began to rebel against everything. Lucas Marshall was a new transfer student in our senior year. He had a wild mane of blonde hair, a faint scar near the corner of his eye, and exuded an air of danger. He never wore his school uniform properly. The top buttons of his shirt were always open, revealing a tank top underneath. A tattoo peeked out from his wrist, drawing fearful or curious glances from classmates whenever he moved his arm. His arrival shook up the entire class, and Victoria was no exception. All her life she had been a puppet on a string, following the instructions of her teachers and elders without question. It wasn't until Lucas arrived that her dull eyes lit up again. The vibrant, spirited look she had was something I had never seen before. Seeing it, my heart clenched. I had a premonition that something was about to change. Lucas was like a bolt of lightning that split her peaceful life open, causing her long-dormant heart to stir. For the first time, she tasted the thrill of being unrestrained. She started skipping classes to date, indulging herself, and doing things she never would have dared to dream of before. More than once, I advised her to focus on her studies and plan for her future. She just scoffed. "Sincere, you're just jealous, aren't you?" She leaned against the rooftop railing, carelessly playing with a tube of lipstick, glancing down at the schoolyard below from time to time. Down below, Lucas was joking around with a few other punks, their loud laughter and crude language drifting up. "Victoria, Lucas is not a good person. You should stay away from him." Victoria tossed the lipstick into her bag and sneered. "And you think you're so noble, talking about people behind their backs?" I tried to reason with her further, but her face suddenly turned cold. "Who do you think you are? What gives you the right to dictate my life?" She strode toward me in her high heels, her eyes sharp. "I'm warning you, don't say another bad word about Lucas, or don't blame me for forgetting our history." Recalling these memories, I was filled with regret. I never should have meddled in her affairs. Thankfully, fate had given me a second chance. When I arrived at the hospital, I saw my father sitting in a chair with an IV drip, and my mother lying on a hospital bed, scrolling through her phone. Seeing them safe and sound, I fought back tears. In my past life, after parting ways with Victoria, I never saw my parents again. After the Clark family went bankrupt, I tried to visit them, but Victoria intervened, using every means to prevent me from seeing my family. 5. I suppressed the turmoil inside me. Only then did I notice the IV needle in my father's arm. "Dad, what's going on? I asked you to play along. Why are you actually hooked up to an 4? I asked anxiously. In my previous life, Victoria told me my father had died of stomach cancer. That memory sent a wave of panic through me. "It's nothing serious," my father reassured me gently. "I just haven't been feeling well these past few days, so I thought I'd get a checkup. No, we need to do a full workup. I couldn't hear anything else right now. In my last life, my mother passed away not long after my father died. This time, I would make sure my parents lived long, healthy lives. First, you tell me what's going on with you. Aren't you usually attached at the hip to that Wainwright girl? Her family has a major crisis today, and you're the one who left," my father said, a hint of jealousy in his tone. I pursed my lips in disdain. "Victoria doesn't even care if her own mother is okay. Why should I stick around? Let's not talk about her. We're getting you checked out right now." Unwilling to discuss Victoria further, I immediately pulled my parents along for the examinations. The Clark family wasn't short on money. The hospital arranged a series of tests for my father that night that didn't require fasting. When the results of the endoscopy came back, I finally breathed a sigh of relief. There was a small tumor in my father's stomach, but it was discovered early. With timely surgery, the prognosis was excellent. After reviewing the report, the doctor praised us repeatedly. "Your son is a real lucky star," the doctor exclaimed. "If this stomach issue had been found later, it would have been a serious problem. Thankfully, we caught it in its early stages." My father also felt I was his lucky star, proudly boasting about me to the doctor. I stood to the side, feeling only guilt as I listened to the praise. I was no lucky star. In my last life, I was the one who got them killed. The next day I took a leave of absence from school and came early to be with my father for his surgery. Just as my father's surgery finished, a patient was rushed into the emergency room. I took one look. It was Victoria. She was covered in blood, the wound on her right leg a shocking sight. A police officer followed close behind. I quickly stopped him. "Officer, what happened?" The officer frowned at me. "Mind your own business." "Officer, I know her. She's my neighbor." I knew the police wouldn't casually disclose case details. But hearing me say this, he pulled me aside and began taking a statement. It turned out they had received a report from a citizen that morning, which led them to the injured Victoria. 6. Please contact her family. We need a guardian present in a situation like this. Hearing this, my heart sank. So Lucas didn't die in this life? Victoria saved him? Then why didn't Lucas call for help immediately after she saved him? And where was Lucas now? It seemed the situation was far more complicated than it appeared. But looking at Victoria's miserable state, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. You chased Lucas. You craved freedom. Was the price you're paying now worth it, Victoria? Officer, Victoria has her dance audition today. If her mother finds out about this, I'm afraid she'll faint on the spot, I said, pretending to be concerned for her. The officer sighed but insisted, a guardian must be present to handle a situation like this. I simply gave the officer their contact information, saving them the trouble of investigating. The police quickly contacted Eleanor, who rushed to the hospital in a panic. Just then, a doctor came out to ask for a signature on a surgical consent form. The damage to her left leg is too severe. We have to amputate. The news nearly made Eleanor collapse. She turned and saw me, and immediately started screaming hysterically. Sincere, you heartless boy, why didn't you watch her properly? Weren't you always by her side? Watch your tone. Why should my son be responsible for watching your family? My mother had appeared at the door at some point, her voice icy cold. Eleanor clearly hadn't expected my mother to be there, and her bravado instantly deflated. She stammered, "That's not what I meant. It's just that I always see him following Vicky around. If he had just talked some sense into her, this wouldn't have happened. Enough, my son's last name is Clark, not Wainwright. He has no obligation to look after your family. His own father is lying in a hospital bed after surgery. Should he have ignored his own dad to chase after your girl? Are all of you in the Wainwright family this unreasonable?" Victoria's mother was silenced, unable to argue. She scurried away to discuss the surgery with the doctor. The outcome of the surgery was no surprise. The northern winters are deadly. For Victoria to have survived after lying injured outside for so long was a miracle in itself. My mother pulled me back to my father's room, complaining the whole way. These Wainwrights are so unreasonable, always trying to push the blame onto you, and you still said you wanted to marry into their family? A family like that is already bullying you before you're even married. What would happen if you actually tied the knot? She poked my forehead and continued her lecture. And you, how could you have fallen for that girl, Victoria? That child is too wild. You'll have a hard time if she marries you. You've always been the one giving in to her. Mom, I get it. I don't like her anymore. 7. I spoke calmly. My mother's words stopped abruptly. She stared at me in disbelief. Sincere, have you really thought it through? You don't like her anymore? I nodded solemnly. A girl who would risk her life for a man. That kind of person. I let a look of disgust cross my face. My parents were stunned when I told them the whole story. I thought that Victoria girl was just arrogant. Turns out she never even cared about our Sincere at all. My mother had never approved of how I doted on Victoria. Now, hearing that she had nearly died for another man, she didn't have a shred of pity. A few hours later, Victoria's aunt, Beatrice, came knocking. At that moment, we were in my father's room, helping him with some broth and complaining about how he was always too busy with work to spend time with us. My father feigned annoyance but let us tease him with a doting smile. Beatrice Wainwright pushed the door open, her expression instantly souring, but she still managed to force a smile. "David, how's your recovery going?" My father gave a slight nod and asked directly, I heard Victoria was in an accident too. How is she doing? Beatrice started to cry. Sincere, Vicky is awake. Could you go see her? I continued to casually eat the food in my hand, saying nonchalantly, I'll go when she's a bit better. Sincere, Vicky is in this state, and you're still here laughing and eating. Beatrice Wainwright scolded me as if I were already her nephew-in-law. What I eat is my own business. I'm not the one who caused Victoria's injuries. My own dad doesn't even lecture me, but you seem to think you have the right. Besides, doesn't Victoria have a boyfriend? You should stop trying to link us together. I wiped my mouth and walked out with the trash bag. Actually, even if she hadn't asked, I was planning to see Victoria. After all, no one wanted to see her current state more than I did. Not only was I going to go, I was going to twist the knife in her heart. After throwing out the trash, I went straight to Victoria's room. When she saw me, she just glanced up faintly. Get me a glass of water, Victoria said. I stood rooted to the spot, my gaze sweeping over her. When Mom leaves, have Lucas come see me, Victoria said, as if talking to herself. I couldn't help but laugh mockingly. Do you even know where Lucas is? It seemed Victoria still didn't know that Lucas had abandoned her yesterday. Seeing her proud demeanor now, she probably didn't know she had lost a leg either. 8. Victoria looked at me impatiently, holding out a slender hand. Give me your phone. I handed it over and watched her dial Lucas's number. A mechanical female voice from the other end announced that the phone was off. She tried dialing several more times, but no one answered. Something must have happened to Lucas. Call the police. Quickly, a look of panic crossed Victoria's face. I watched her with cold eyes. How pathetic. She was in this state and still worried about that man. Lucas is fine. He flew out of the country this morning. Impossible. Victoria bit her lip. A flicker of panic crossed her eyes, but she quickly regained her stubborn expression. He must be worried my parents will blame him. That fool. I dared to give up my audition for him. How could he be such a coward? I couldn't stand her self-deception any longer and spoke up. You were found by a janitor. The doctor said if it had been any later, you would have been dead. Victoria's expression began to waver, but she still clung to her disbelief. Your mother suffered a stroke from the shock and is now bedridden. I continued to state the cruel facts. Watching her face grow paler and paler, I knew it was time for the final blow. Because you weren't brought to the hospital in time, your left leg has been amputated. Victoria froze. She trembled as she threw back the blanket. Seeing the empty space where her left leg should have been, she let out a piercing scream. Impossible, this isn't real. She frantically tore at the bedsheets, clawed at her own face, and completely broke down. The compound fracture in her right leg made it impossible for her to stand, so she could only writhe in agony on the hospital bed. This girl, who had been dancing since she was a child, had lost her stage forever. The freedom she cherished most, and the graceful legs of a dancer, were gone from her forever. I quietly exited the room, gently closing the door behind me. The police investigation ultimately came up with nothing, as there were too many blind spots in the old district's surveillance. The truth would only be revealed if Lucas was found. In my past life, Victoria had always resented me for not letting her answer that call, blaming me for Lucas's death. 9. Back then, I was just a naive kid. I always felt like I had indirectly caused someone's death and was consumed by guilt. Later, I figured it out. If Lucas was truly in danger, he could have called the police. Why did he specifically need Victoria to save him? It was clearly a carefully orchestrated trap. As for the mastermind, they would soon surface. With Victoria's fall from grace, I, with my excellent grades, was successfully admitted to a top university in the country. I chose to major in business management because I wanted to make Victoria taste even more bitterness. On the day of the banquet, the mystery was solved. It turned out that Mr. Wainwright had another daughter who had been living elsewhere for many years and had only recently been found. The Wainwright family had no need for a disabled heiress, especially since Eleanor had silently consented. When Evelyn Wainwright appeared, I saw the ambition in her eyes at a glance. She was nothing like her gentle-sounding name. This illegitimate daughter, who had drifted for years, hadn't even finished high school before entering the workforce. And now, Richard Wainwright wanted her to take over the company directly. Mr. Wainwright had always believed that formal education was useless and that practical experience was king. Before, with the perfect heiress Victoria, he wasn't in a hurry. Now that this daughter was less capable, he had to start training her immediately. I took the initiative to greet Evelyn, and she immediately blushed. "Hello, Evelyn. I'm Sincere Clark. It's a pleasure to meet you today." Evelyn had been met with cold shoulders recently. I was the first to show her kindness, and she was flattered. Sincere, don't associate with that kind of person, an uncouth country girl. The Wainwright family isn't what it used to be. My parents repeatedly advised me to stay away from the Wainwrights, feeling their family was too complicated. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. On the day I left for university, Victoria made a rare trip out to see me off. "Sincere, why are you going to a school so far away?" Her eyes held a rare look of pleading. "Wait for me for one more year, and we can apply to a local university together, okay?" I just smiled. I couldn't even be bothered to refute such shameless words. After all, there were many more things waiting to provoke her. I chose a sunny southern city. The cold of the north reminded me of that unbearable past. Whenever I thought of jumping from the rooftop in the torrential rain of my past life, I longed to be bathed in warm sunlight. 10. I planned to take my parents to settle in a warm city after this was all over. After starting university, I poured all my energy into my studies while also participating in various club activities. I wore a sharp suit for debate competitions, drank and chatted with classmates at bars on weekends, and traveled extensively. I actively shared my life on social media, with captions like, "University really is the best time of your life. You can manage your own time freely, pursue your dreams to the fullest, and make friends from all over the world." I knew Victoria would see these posts, and the words were enough to sting her heart. I wanted her to understand the freedom she craved in high school was worthless. The Lucas she was infatuated with was nothing special in college. Anyone could shine as brightly as Lucas. I wanted her to see clearly that if she had just held on for another 6 months, she would have gained true freedom. Her so-called rebellious acts, giving up everything for love, were nothing but a farce. Our parents might have been a bit strict, but Richard and Eleanor were actually very lenient with her. She had her own dance studio where she could practice freely and a generous allowance. All they asked of her was to one day inherit the Wainwright family business. Other than that, they never interfered in her life. She was spoiled from a young age and mistook their care for confinement. Sure enough, after seeing my post, Victoria immediately called me. At that moment, I was at a bar playing Texas Hold'em with friends, and the atmosphere was lively. "Sincere, is university life really that amazing?" "Even more amazing than you can imagine," I answered nonchalantly, while still discussing the game with my classmates. "Sorry, I'm busy right now. I have to go." With that, I hung up on her. She once thought that dating Lucas was such a grand affair. She felt braver than anyone, that rebelling against her parents was the ultimate freedom. And now, I heard that Victoria fell into a deep depression for a long time afterward. Evelyn was the one who told me all this. Since becoming friends with Evelyn, we had kept in touch. Evelyn wasn't good with academics and would come to me for help when she couldn't understand company documents. I explained things to her many times. As a top student in management, I often became her lifeline. And the projects Mr. Wainwright gave Evelyn to practice on also became opportunities for me to accumulate experience. Under Mr. Wainwright's guidance and cultivation, my university life was filled with both excellent grades and a wealth of practical experience. 11. I was already intimately familiar with the inner workings of the Wainwright Corporation. After completing my studies and returning home, Mr. Wainwright suggested that Evelyn and I get engaged. My parents were vehemently opposed, but I readily accepted. "That's an excellent proposal. Evelyn and I have always gotten along well, and a marriage between our families would be beneficial for the company's development." At a gathering of our two families, I cheerfully agreed to the marriage. Evelyn's face beamed with joy, but a flicker of unease crossed her eyes. Of course she should be worried. I had quite a few dalliances on the side. However, that suited my plan perfectly. Victoria shot up from her seat in protest. She was fitted with a prosthetic leg, but she was no longer the graceful, agile dancer she once was. No, Sincere, how could you get engaged to her? We're the ones who are perfect for each other. She looked at me pitifully, as if I had betrayed her. Victoria, our childhood feelings have long since faded with the wind. Besides, weren't you completely devoted to Lucas back then? I ruthlessly reopened her old wound. The name Lucas had become a forbidden topic for her. He had been gone for so long without a word, he must have had a guilty conscience. No matter how Victoria tried to rationalize it, this was an unchangeable fact. You gave up a leg for Lucas. In the future, whenever Sincere sees your disability, won't he be reminded of the price you paid for someone else? How could a marriage like that possibly work? Eleanor said, hitting the nail on the head. Victoria was already disabled, and her parents favored her sister. She was now an outsider in the Wainwright family, barely getting by on the money her father gave her. But my goal was to make the entire Wainwright family taste bitterness. The wedding was held soon after. After the marriage, I began working at Wainwright Corp., and Evelyn gradually took over the company. On the surface, Evelyn was the one at the helm, but I was the one making the decisions behind the scenes. Through our life together, the truth of what happened that year gradually came to light. One night, Evelyn, drunk, called one of her cronies. "Boss, that bastard Lucas actually ran off. What do we do now? Don't let him have a chance to come back to the country. That guy is damn lucky to escape after being sold overseas. But don't worry, we have dirt on him. He wouldn't dare make a move." I was lying in bed and immediately pretended to be asleep when I heard the door open. Everything confirmed my suspicions. Evelyn was the mastermind behind the whole conspiracy. As for why I didn't see Evelyn in my previous life, the answer was obvious. They had accidentally killed Lucas, and Evelyn had subsequently fled. 12. In my past life, Victoria's path was smooth, so Richard Wainwright would naturally not offend his brilliant daughter for a disgraced Evelyn. In this life, Victoria lost her halo and her future on the stage. So, Mr. Wainwright no longer abandoned Evelyn. I quickly arranged for people to search for Lucas on the border while setting up informants in H City. Lucas was in a desperate situation, alone, with no one to turn to but Evelyn. As expected, my men soon sent me a recent photo of Lucas. He was gaunt and covered in scars. Only his face still retained some of its former charm, though he looked much older than his peers. Lucas soon found Evelyn, demanded a large sum of money, and was told to leave H City. But he was unwilling to leave and secretly stayed in the city, constantly asking about Victoria. I instructed my men to leak information to Lucas. I told them to say that Victoria had never forgotten him all these years. He took the bait. I was secretly delighted. The moment he reunited with Victoria, my plan would unfold. The Wainwright Corporation was soon investigated for operational issues. Someone reported Evelyn for illegal activities, and she was taken in by the police for questioning. Everything was falling into place according to my design. That night, after Lucas contacted Victoria, he was also arrested. Victoria, her eyes filled with tears, confronted Lucas furiously. "Why did you abandon me?" I couldn't help but find it ironic. If Lucas hadn't left, Victoria could have found a noble excuse for giving up her dance career, claiming it was for true love and freedom. It was his departure that had turned her into a laughingstock. Victoria had been relentlessly searching for the culprit who shattered her dreams. The emotional trauma was so deep that finding the perpetrator became the only hope that kept her going. To avoid being implicated, Lucas confessed everything about Evelyn's crimes. While Evelyn was still in custody, her evil deeds were exposed. The Wainwright family fell into chaos. The truth was that Lucas was a pawn carefully placed by Evelyn's side. Since childhood, Victoria had excelled in her studies and was adored by her parents. Meanwhile, Evelyn and her mother struggled to even pay for her tuition. Her mind had been twisted for a long time. Starting in middle school, she began hanging out with delinquents, secretly watching Victoria. Seeing Victoria being chauffeured everywhere, the golden girl in everyone's eyes. She burned with jealousy, determined to destroy her. Once the thought took root, it grew like a weed. Her first plan was to destroy Victoria's dance career by getting her entangled in a romance. She observed for a long time. 13. She discovered Victoria wasn't interested in top students. She wasn't moved by sunny, popular boys, nor was she charmed by cheerful ones. Even mature, handsome guys couldn't win her over. Finally, she realized that no rebellious bad boy had ever tried to win her affection. This discovery gave her hope. She had been around the block for a long time and knew all sorts of people. Lucas was the most vain, most skilled actor, and most handsome one she knew. She paid him just $500 to get close to Victoria, and to her surprise, he succeeded easily. Things progressed far better than expected. Later, Lucas, attracted by Victoria's wealth and status, wanted out. But how could Evelyn allow that? They were desperate criminals. She had her men assault Lucas, recorded it, and used the video to blackmail him into continuing to seduce Victoria. Evelyn was furious at the time, shocked that even someone like Lucas would dare to betray her. When I revealed all this to Victoria, her eyes were red, and she clutched her disabled legs. So that's how it was. I regretted so much. Victoria looked at me with tears in her eyes. Sincere, back in the prep room that day, I really should have just turned off the phone. You could have stopped that call for me if you cared about me so much. Why didn't you stop him from contacting me? If you had helped, none of this would have happened, and I wouldn't have lost my stage forever. Faced with her moral blackmail, I responded with a cold laugh. Oh, Victoria, back then, you didn't even care about your own parents for the sake of your so-called true love. Isn't Lucas the one you loved most? Isn't this all your own doing? Why bother regretting it now? I didn't waste any more time on her and went straight to the detention center. Evelyn looked haggard and seemed to feel guilty towards me. I didn't blame her. I just put 2 documents down in front of her. One was a stock transfer agreement for Wainwright Corp., and the other was a surrogacy contract. Evelyn was overjoyed. You're willing to let us have our own child? She couldn't believe I would agree to surrogacy. Due to multiple abortions in her youth, she was unable to conceive. In our 3 years of marriage, countless medications had failed to result in a pregnancy. Yes, I agree. But the company is in a crisis right now. The new project has run into problems, and we're drowning in debt, on the verge of bankruptcy. I can't hold on any longer. I'm planning to sell my shares to pay off the debts. When you get out, you can come work at my family's company. Just let me step down from the board. You can sell the shares and start a new business. When I get out of prison, our family can live a good life together. Let's get a fake divorce for now. 14. Evelyn couldn't accept the bankruptcy of the Wainwright family. Over the years, she had developed an arrogant personality, firmly believing her judgment was always correct. Don't worry. The day you're free, our family will be there at the gate to welcome you. I suppressed my disgust and put on a convincing act of a loving husband. After leaving the detention center, I immediately contacted a lawyer to handle the divorce and the stock transfer. Victoria, however, was staunchly against me selling the shares. Sincere, don't sell. Trust me, we can definitely get Wainwright Corp through this crisis. I've already found a surrogate. All I want now is to focus on having a child. I can't accept your proposal. I just want the money. I stroked the documents and gave Victoria a meaningful smile. You don't lack money at all. You still have the Clark family. Why are you in such a hurry? If you want to save Wainwright Corp., then raise the money yourself and buy back the shares. After that, you can run it however you want. The shares Victoria held were few. Most were under my name. Through some maneuvering, the shares held by her father also ended up in my possession. This was the result of Evelyn's persuasion. Because I had promised her a child, Richard Wainwright trusted me completely. Moreover, over the years, he had seen the corruption within the company and understood it was on the verge of collapse. If Evelyn wanted to truly control Wainwright Corp., she needed a huge amount of capital. In the end, she bought the shares, because losing Wainwright Corp. Meant Victoria would be completely useless. Without sufficient funds, she had to sell her properties, pawn her jewelry, and beg for loans everywhere. Finally, she managed to become the de facto controller of Wainwright Corp., and I received the liquidated shares, not a huge amount, just $200 million. Worried that Victoria would give up if she couldn't raise the funds, I didn't ask for an exorbitant price. Not long after Victoria had settled into her position, I triggered the traps I had long set, plunging the company into crisis once again. Scandals at Wainwright Corp. Were exposed one after another, multiple projects were halted, capital flow dried up, and ultimately the company had to declare bankruptcy. Fortunately for me, all the company's debts were under Evelyn's name. Victoria only owned shares. She had simply lost her entire investment. No, she was also saddled with the massive debts she had taken on to acquire the shares. Tens of millions of dollars might be a lot for an ordinary person, but for a disabled Victoria with no work experience, this debt was enough to crush her completely. As for my family's company, over the years I had been secretly persuading my father to gradually sell off his shares. He was no longer the head of Clark Industries. By the time I sold my Wainwright shares, my parents had already flown to a country in Europe. I had arranged their immigration long ago, allowing them to enjoy their retirement in peace. After watching the Wainwright empire crumble, I too vanished without a trace. 15. 2 years later, I returned to H City with a little boy with blonde hair and blue eyes. It was winter, and the biting wind made one shiver. I heard that Evelyn's mother had abandoned Richard and left town. Victoria's mother, unable to afford medical treatment after the bankruptcy, had passed away in pain, and Victoria and her father were now living in a dilapidated rental unit in the city's slums. When they saw me appear, a glimmer of light flashed in their eyes. But when they saw the blonde, blue-eyed baby in my arms, Richard's face was filled with shock. "Sincere, where have you been? This child, whose child is this? This is the child my wife and I had." "He's already a year and a half old," I said with a smile. Richard clutched his chest, his face a mask of horror. "This is not a child of the Wainwright bloodline. How dare you deceive us like this? Of course not a vicious woman like Evelyn. Why would I ever want her child? I came back this time just to see for myself how miserable you've become. Seeing you in this state, I am very satisfied." They were dressed in rags. Richard, used to being served by maids, was a chauvinist who naturally disdained housework, and Victoria, with her disabled leg, could only do odd jobs to support them both. As for why she could only do odd jobs, it was naturally because of her massive debt. Any money that appeared in her account was immediately seized by the bank. She stared at me with red-rimmed eyes, her voice choked with sobs. "Sincere, why would you do this to me? I never did anything to hurt you, yet you chose to retaliate against us like this." I thought back to the days I was locked in the Wainwright attic. I had begged her countless times. I told her to find the real person who killed Lucas. I pleaded with her to let me go. I'd only intercepted that call by chance. I hadn't harmed Lucas. The punishment was too cruel. She had said coldly, "You think you can escape punishment by playing innocent? I've decided you're the murderer, and that's the truth." A bodyguard came over and took the child from my arms. "Since you insisted on making me bear a false accusation, don't blame me for returning the favor. My purpose on this trip was simple. It was to let them see my happiness and to make them live in regret forever." Victoria, enraged, grabbed a brick from the ground and tried to throw it at me. Of course, my bodyguard quickly subdued her. "Should we take her to the police station?" The bodyguard pinned her to the ground. Victoria's gaunt cheek pressed hard against a piece of gravel. The sharp stone immediately cut her face and blood trickled down her cheek. "No need. The police station would give her food and a warm place to sleep. That's too good for her 16 in my last life because Lucas died in the rain." Her heart was broken. She always found ways to torment me on rainy days. Not only did she force me to stand in the rain, But she also wouldn't let me change into dry clothes afterward. Since she was so heartless, let her have a taste of it herself. Victoria barely scraped by with odd jobs. She couldn't afford any heating equipment. Her dilapidated rental barely even provided shelter from the wind and rain. According to the weather forecast, this winter was set to be the coldest in a century. Victoria's epilogue. After Sincere left, Victoria fell into a delirious fever on a rainy night. In her high fever, she dreamed she was back at that critical moment of her dance audition. Sincere had intercepted that fateful phone call in time. She was ecstatic in the dream. How wonderful, this way she could participate in the competition and realize her dream of attending the dance academy. She wouldn't meet Lucas, her life wouldn't derail, and she could spend the rest of her life with Sincere. She was immersed in this beautiful fantasy. But reality had taken a completely different turn. After Lucas died, she had blamed everything on Sincere. She abused him, destroyed his family, and even forced him to stand in the rain on a cold winter night. Finally, on one rainy night, he chose to end his life by jumping from the roof. The moment she lost Sincere, her soul felt as if it had been hollowed out. Only then did she realize that she had fallen deeply in love with him, but she could never get over Lucas's death. Only by constantly hurting Sincere could she temporarily numb her own guilt. After Sincere's death, she turned herself into the police. Waking from the dream, Victoria was drenched in tears, letting out a painful and crazed laugh. Sincere's epilogue. I was well aware of Evelyn's character, but without using her, destroying the Wainwright family would have been nearly impossible. I couldn't bear to watch the Wainwrights continue to live freely. In my past life, Victoria used our marriage to ruin my family. This life, I would give her a taste of her own medicine. As for that woman, Victoria, I swore I would never have anything to do with her again. When Evelyn appeared before me, I immediately conceived the perfect revenge plan. Evelyn was both foolish and arrogant. She also carried a dark, hidden past, making her the perfect tool sent by fate. I deliberately showed her kindness, built a friendship, and eventually married her. Every intimate moment after our marriage made me sick. In the early days, I did everything I could to avoid getting her pregnant. I would never let her carry my child. But to make her willingly transfer her shares, a child was a necessary bargaining chip. So I traveled abroad and carefully selected the right genes. Now my child is intelligent, adorable, and well-mannered. I not only control a vast business empire, but also have a happy and fulfilling family. You could say I'm the ultimate winner. End of story.